Hello and welcome. Thanks for joining us today on We the People with Josh and Rick. I'm Josh Denny.
And I'm Rick Roos. And We the People with Josh and Rick would like to welcome an American hero, Major General Paul Vallely. Many of our viewers remember that General Vallely and his sidekick, Air Force Major General Tom McInerney, were instrumental in being Fox News military analysts in the dark days and dark years after 9/11 on the Fox News channel. Many of our viewers will remember also that Major General Paul Vallely was here in Madison in 2012 for a Tea Party event when he spoke eloquently as far as the dangers of international terrorism. Today, Major General Paul Vallely lives in Montana with his wife Muffin. Today, I believe they're in Sun Valley, Idaho. We're so glad you're here. My basic premise, because the world's in such a mess, my thought was, if you were head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and you had a president that listened, what would your priorities be as far as the world today? I mean, we've got problems in our country, we've got problems in the world.
If I were the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the senior military advisor to the President of the United States, who's the Commander-in-Chief, I would sit down and have a really straightforward eye-to-eye talk with him and lay it on the line, because Obama and the administration seem to be totally inept in national security affairs. And so I would have maybe a series of meetings with him over a 24-hour period and say, this is what we have to do. We need to look at today and tomorrow, not look behind us. And we have to make rational decisions about our national security, which aren't political, but they're based on fact, rationale, and the realities. And I say realities because when I was in Egypt about 2 months ago, I met with Charles el-Sisi, the new president of Egypt. And he said, you know, one of the problems with the United States is you always look at the world through your eyes. You need to start looking through our eyes over here in the Middle East and see the Middle East as we see it, and then you'd have an understanding. And that was a very good point. I'm not sure our current chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the military, have been on the ground in Syria like I have, on the ground in Turkey, on the ground in Iraq, and on the ground previously in Iraq before we all pulled out, but also 2 trips to Egypt. I'm the only senior military individual that's been inside Syria in the last year. I went into Aleppo, the most dangerous city of the world. So again, coming back to how you form a strategy is what we call a forward strategy, Mr. President. Looking at today and tomorrow, looking where the threats are to the United States. Number one, look at the Middle East. Look at the threats of ISIS now, forming the global caliphate, and the Islamic forces of the Levant, which people have to understand is a region set up and establishes the Central Caliphate region, going from the Turkish border to the Egyptian border. That it becomes the new Levant, and that spreads. Because they do not, like Al-Qaeda, recognize national borders, nor do they recognize nationalism. And so the global caliphate, Mr. President, you have to understand what their objectives and missions are. And we know for sure their mission is to destroy the United States, the West as they know it, and Israel. So therefore, we need a strategy to deal with that, and not using conventional forces, but unconventional forces with good intelligence. Now, the second major threat area, and it could even be our primary one now, is our borders, particularly the southern border. And I've just written a lot of notes for you today, Mr. President, on what we need to do. And what we need to do, number one, is lock down that border. We need to send the military, along with the National Guard, along that border, and be able to interdict within a 20-kilometer no-go zone south of the border any threats against the United States, cartels, movement of convoys, the coyotes bringing people in. We have got to stop this on the other side of the border. We must do that now. We have plenty of assets in Fort Hood, Texas, Fort Huachuca, Arizona, Camp Pendleton, California with the Marines. We have mobile forces. We have drones. We conduct what we call intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance operation over that 20-kilometer zone. We find out where the targets are, and we go in and interdict those targets.
Are you talking over in Mexico as well?
Yes,
okay.
Mexico. Now, prior to doing that, I would fly to Mexico City. I'd meet with the president of Mexico, the president of Honduras, the president of Guatemala, and say, gentlemen, within the next 24 hours, we are going to cease all military aid to your countries, all foreign aid to your countries. Any cost that it's cost the United States in terms of taking care of all these poor children, refugees that have come in, is going to be deducted from any foreign aid to your country. You will cease and desist on sending and policing what you can. You will cease and desist the movement of those convoys using your own forces. And this is a directive. This is the way you have to deal with national leaders. You've got to deal like a Putin does. Putin plays hardball. We have a president that's been playing, Mr. President, if I can tell you that, you've been playing wiffle ball. This is big league stuff. And so all of these presidents down there, I would say, once we cut the foreign aid off in 24 hours, unless we hear back from you that you're going to take positive action to stop the flow of illegal immigrants into the United States, this is what's going to happen, and it's going to be not good for any of us. The second thing is I would stop all the agreements under NAFTA. I would only allow commercial traffic between Mexico and the United States. The Guard will have a duty that can be called up, and as you know, Governor Perry's already called up the 1,000 troops to put down there on his border. Governor Brewer needs to do the same thing, and the Mexico governor needs to do the same thing, and the California governor. So there's things here we can do to lay the law down. And also, Mr. President, we want that Marine released from the Tijuana jail within 24 hours. So now you have to make demands when you're dealing in a power situation. And also, I mean, you can be nice about it. You can smile when you say, Mr. President, your aid's going to be cut off in 24 hours unless you take some positive action. So those are things along the border that can be done. But we have to use our military assets, because on that border are crossing radical Islamic cells that we know are coming in. The drug cartels are sweeping into the country, going to targeted areas inside the United States, such as Chicago, Denver, Seattle, New York, Massachusetts, Boston, Massachusetts, for example. Now, that's the near term. Threat.
Question on that, if you don't mind. Yes. So, reality being, unfortunately, you're not going to be having that conversation with the president, and he's not going to have that conversation with the folks south of our border. What do you think? So, you mentioned Governor Perry calling up the National Guard, 1,000 troops right now. If that happened in those other states, New Mexico, Arizona, California, can the states do this? Because they would have an absence, obviously, of that, national, conversation happening with the presidents of those other countries. It would be unilateral in those states. Could they have an impact? Is that something that you think would help?
Oh, absolutely. And of course, the National Guard comes under the states. They come under the governor. Now, they're only federalized, like we did in Iraq and Afghanistan, as the units were needed in the Guard to complement the active forces, such as helicopters, some of the specialty communications and intelligence. The whole force is dependent upon what we call the total force concept. That's the active, that's the reserve, and the Guard. Now, until the president federalizes the National Guard, they still remain an asset of the governors, and they can use them for natural disasters, such as you've seen them called out, for example, in New Orleans, tornadoes. This is a natural disaster on the borders that's happening. Right. And so I applaud Governor Perry. I recommended to him when I got a call from Texas that he do it immediately. And he now has taken those steps forward. Now, those Guard people along the border will stay inside the United States borders, and they will complement the sheriffs in the counties. They'll complement the Border Patrol and any other Homeland Security forces that we may have down there. But then, with these presidents down there, to make it known to them that we will interdict within 20 kilometers any identifiable targets that are a threat to the United States. And they have to be prepared for that, because, gentlemen, This is serious business. America is being tested to its limits right now, and we're not going to tolerate us being the victims of illegal immigrants, because we know, Mr. President of Mexico, you do not allow that. And the Mexicans only really have about 150 miles down their border when you look at Guatemala, whereas ours is, what, 16, 1,700 miles, depending on how you measure it.
If I could just, I know we're kind of jumping back, but you mentioned the Israelis there, that situation. I was doing some research on this, wanted to kind of get your opinion on that situation a little bit. So since 2002, they have had in excess of 6,000 rockets fired into their territory. That comes up to something like 45 per month. Obviously, no other country on the planet would be expected to take that sitting down, and yet that's kind of what the consensus is. We've seen riots. We've seen riots in this country, protests against Israel. I think they've had a measured response to that situation. But I wanted to get your military perspective on that, because I consider it, with the Syria, Iran, some of the influences in there, really diversion, specifically with Iran, to divert from their nuclear program. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, obviously, a sovereign nation like Israel has the right to defend itself in any way that they can and use their own forces to do that. We know that Gaza has been building up rockets, missiles, and armaments for the last 5 years, primarily supplied by Iran and Hezbollah. So when you look at the cement that was brought into Gaza that was supposed to be used for construction of buildings, the Israeli intelligence found out that those tunnels were built with that cement for an underground facility to store rockets, ammunition, and also to use tunnels to go under the fence, under the wire of Gaza into Israel, to kidnap Israelis and also to target certain things with weapons they can take through those tunnels. So as a result, Prime Minister Netanyahu had made the decision that they would conduct the initial air attack to try to neutralize as many rocket launches as they could. They employed their dome system, which is just a wonderful anti-missile capability. And they also then planned with 5 task force brigades to go ahead and to do a land attack in Gaza for 2 reasons. Really, to demilitarize that Gaza area. By demilitarizing that, you basically neutralize their ability to launch any kind of rockets or missiles from there. The second is to destroy the tunnel system so that they will not have access underground into Israel. Now, when I was in Gaza several years ago, they were destroying the tunnels that were coming from the Egyptian side in Israel, what they call the Philadelphia line. And they managed to destroy over 100 tunnels down there. Then they were rebuilt again. And General el-Sisi, the new president of Egypt, who again I visited with twice last year, are providing a lot of support to Israel to block off those tunnels from the Sinai, again, through the Philadelphia line into Gaza. Now, what Israel has to look forward to now is a possible attack from southern Lebanon on their northern border, where there's some 60 to 70,000 rockets under Hezbollah control. And we know the targets of Hezbollah primarily are the Israeli airfields. If they can knock down and neutralize the Israelis' ability to launch their aircraft, then they pretty much have done a good job to neutralize the armed forces of Israel, even though they'll still have a ground capability. So all of those things are going on over there, and I think they'll, at this point in time, they're not going to listen to Senator Kerry, or the United States National Security Team, to include our president, because they know that all we'll try to do is do some kind of a ceasefire that never will work over there. Hamas is one of the highest levels of Islamic Jihad. They're just the same as Al-Qaeda, the same as the ISIS forces, the same as al-Nusra. And so that has to be recognized. Again, we're looking through our eyes rather than looking through the eyes of the Israelis over there.
But looking at through those eyes of the Israelis, what should we see? I mean, other than it's a clear and present danger to their existence, and Hamas is dedicated to that. I mean,
Hamas is, Hezbollah is, Iran is, and ISIS now is.
Mm-hmm.
Now you have a cooperative effort going on now, which is interesting since the United States is not a player at all. They have no confidence over any of the countries that we can act as a superpower anymore and affect changes in the Middle East because of the lack of leadership of our current president and his national security team. And so you now have an alliance going on between Egypt, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait in support of Israel, what they're doing against the Palestinians in Gaza, particularly, I should say, Hamas. Now you have another coalition of Turkey and Qatar supporting Hamas. But what you see is a power vacuum over there being filled now by the Arab states, which is good. Mm-hmm. Because if anybody can do a negotiated settlement over there, it would be Egypt, just like they did years ago. And Joel El-Sisi over there is very capable. So we may see more happening with those alliances over there, trying to rectify that situation and at least come up with some kind of an agreement. But until Gaza is demilitarized completely, the Israelis should not quit on this.
You mentioned President Putin. We've got a problem there. He just took down an unarmed airliner and then took down 2 more jets today. We haven't got a card to play there. It doesn't seem like. I don't. The national interest, I'm not sure what it is, other than the fact that some of our citizens were on board that airliner. Again, in your role as joint...
Putin will have his way. Putin has an end game over there, and that end game is to annex some of those bordering countries that were part of the Soviet Federation before, when it was the USSR. And he's done that now with Crimea. He's doing it with eastern Ukraine. He'll be looking at a part of his whole grand plan to include other countries that are on the border. Putin knows what he's doing, he plays hardball. So you have to look again through Putin's eyes, and he will completely not be put in a jeopardizing situation just because of sanctions. He will do what he wants to do. Now, there is some word coming out today that Putin may even be being framed on this takedown, that it could have been Ukraine that ordered the missile to go up. So that just came out today. It's another look from somebody over there that's been gathering intelligence. So let's not jump to conclusions that it, in fact, was Putin. I would think that looks like it.
Right, but I was understanding that if the airliner's at 33,000 feet, it's a fairly sophisticated anti-aircraft mechanism to bring them down, and that the Russians, you presuppose that they would have that.
Yeah, they have the SA-11 system. And I don't know whether the Ukraine armed forces, which were part and parcel working with Russia, as you know, before all of this started, did not have some SA-11s as well. I don't know that yet. And I haven't found any intelligence analysts that have reported on that. So basically, yeah, we're going to do sanctions. Western Europe doesn't agree with what we want to do because they're dependent on the natural gas and oil from Russia. And so they're going to be very careful and engaging militarily. So I don't see anything happening there other than the Ukrainians trying to stand up taller and against Putin. They have a fairly good armed forces, but nothing compared to what the Russians have. And of course, you got the opposition forces in eastern Ukraine now in that zone that was created between the majority of the Ukrainian territory and Russia.
So you wouldn't go along with the idea of, as far as arming the people in Ukraine that could possibly fight? And the other thing that I was hearing posited, other than this...
I would.
Oh, okay.
I would plus up. I would give them greater intelligence capability. I would also provide them whatever capability they need, at least to protect themselves from the Russians.
Well, also the idea as far as redeploying, which the current president did not want to do, as far as deploying the basically the Star Wars defense in Czechoslovakia and Poland, that would be another card to be played.
Should be a card that we have on the table now. Unfortunately, it's not. Yeah.
Yeah. We're a nut player. You have to understand that. We have a community organizer that's not prepared to lead in this world of great threats, not only to the United States, but to other people. He has no idea what to do. He's not prepared, never was prepared to be president. And he's got a bunch of lackeys that are working for him that seem to be totally inept as well. And that's why I'd like to see some of our generals and admirals standing up. And finally, we did see last week General Kelly start to stand up about the southern border. So some of them are starting to speak out now. They're just sort of fed up with this misuse of our military, our social engineering in the military, the purging of officers, purging of the training requirements, and basically gutting our military. So you may see some more action by the senior generals and admirals now. I think they're a little bit fed up with Obama and his people.
As I understand it, going back to the Ukraine thing really quickly, we had an agreement with them as part of their nuclear disarmament back in the 90s, I think signed by President Clinton, that basically if this happened, because our concern was Russian aggression, if this happened, just go ahead and disarm, sign this agreement, but we've got your back. And obviously we haven't. There's been no verbal response, much less arming any kind of support for them. So you talk about stepping back and looking through the rest of the world's eyes. When you've got those kind of agreements, obviously that's only got to embolden Putin. But what about what's your perspective? What does that do to the rest of the world as they see us backing down from our obligations? Because we've got obligations elsewhere, Taiwan, for instance, and the Chinese being a superpower there. So just your perspective.
Nobody has faith in the United States anymore. They have no faith in those agreements. Powers like Putin and in Iran, Assad in Syria, they don't care what the agreements are. Excuse me, let me just take a quick part. Anyhow, when you're dealing with those kinds of dictators in a way, and they look at the world through their eyes and what their missions are, and if they look at a weak United States who was the superpower, they're going to try to get away with anything they can. And that's what's happening. Iran will have its nuclear weapons. It will continue to support international terrorism. We'll try to negotiate and appease and sanctions. And we're going to face a situation much worse than World War II.
General, what's the hope? What hope do you have right now?
The hope is we have to have new leadership in America. The American people have to stand up. We've got to say we're not going to take it anymore. We're tired of gutting America, weakening America, because each week something happens.
That's right.
The deception and the corruption within the IRS, for example, within the Justice Department. You see what's happening in the Veterans Administration. America has never been in worse shape than it is right now. We have a situation where the Chinese and the Russians are working very hard to make sure the dollar is not the reserve currency of the world. And when that happens, the dollar dives, our markets crash. So from that perspective, we have all these external threats, but we also have a myriad of internal domestic threats which we must deal with. And only good, solid leadership can change that. So American people, get off your derriere. Let's get a new leadership team in. Let's impeach President Obama and Joe Biden, and let's get a new team in there for America. Because remember, Americans come first, and being an American comes before being a Democrat or Republican.
General, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being on We the People with Josh and Rick. We're the voice of liberty here in the Ohio River Valley. Hope to get you back in a couple months, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Be happy to.
And my best to Muffin, okay?
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Take care, friend. God bless.
God bless.
All right, that was exciting. I mean, it's spells a bleak situation we're in, but I think it's interesting to see someone that's served his country to the degree that he has, still energized. I mean, he's retired, right?
Right.
Why is he doing what he's doing? He has hope. He has hope.
He has hope for our country, and one thing the viewers don't know is that in 2005, his son Scott died in special ops training, Ranger training. So, I mean, he's given to this country an awful lot, and I'd listen to him. The one thing as far as, and I don't know if there's going to be a political will to impeach the president or Biden. I mean, I'd love to see it happen, but the idea has been floated as far as the impeaching the people, the Department of Justice, but they're going to say it's racist. But as far as going after the Treasury Department, Interior Department for not enforcing our laws.
That's right.
The Medicare Department, as far as Obamacare, you just can't keep doing that. But just going after the second tier down, they went after Scooter Libby.
That's right.
With baseless charges.
Yeah.
These charges are founded. We'd like to thank you tonight for listening to We the People with Josh and Rick. We want to leave you with hope. We also want to leave you with thinking. We're trying to bring you people that will have an impact on your life. We know that God's in control. We're not in control, and that's what we base our faith in our country on, because it says one country under God, not anything else. But
it's like Major General Vallely said, we've all got to get off our derriere and do something. This is what we're doing. We welcome your feedback, and just God bless. Thanks for viewing.